But was this story just too good to be true?
I am absolutely convinced that it was a hoax. And I'm convinced because I believe them.
I don't believe the Tasaday are a hoax.
20 years after their discovery, the debate rages on. Can we unlock the mystery of the lost tribe?
Funding for NOVA is provided by Johnson & Johnson, the signature recognized around the world for commitment to quality healthcare products for the entire family. And Lockheed, America's aerospace company, supporting math, science, and engineering education for national technology leadership. Major funding for NOVA is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by the financial support of viewers like you.
It sounds like something out of a Jules Verne novel. That somewhere, in a remote corner of the world, a lost tribe, untouched by time, still lives in the last tiny corner of Eden left on Earth. Imagine the excitement when 20 years ago, that tribe was discovered. The Tasaday, 26 men, women, and children, living the life of Stone Age cavemen, unaware that there were any other human beings on the planet. Were the Tasaday really the people that time forgot? Or do these pictures tell the story of a hoax, one of the most elaborate in the history of science? The strange story of the Tasaday begins here in the Philippines, in the rainforest of the island of Mindanao. In the early 1970s, loggers were cutting down the rainforest at an ever-increasing pace. There were rumors of a strange group of forest dwellers living right in the loggers' path. And President Ferdinand Marcos's special assistant for national minorities, Manda Elizalde, had gone to investigate. Elizalde, one of the wealthiest young men in the Philippines, met the group first in June 1971. By 1972, through his private aid organization, Panamin, he was inviting the world in to see what he had found. The tribe called Elizalde Diwata, God.
Of all the tribes we dealt with, perhaps the Tasaday touched me most. Although they never realized that we were helping them in any way. They didn't know there was a country. They didn't know there was a sea. They didn't know that their land had to be protected. The simplest things that we had with our group, for instance, like rice, they did not even know what it was or even have a name for it.
The Tasaday live in caves. They make fire with a fire drill. They have no agriculture, taking their food from the trees and streams around them. They use stone tools. Their lives are so peaceful that they have no words for weapons, hostility, or war.
This brought to the group a certain amount of suspicion at first, and then concern that we should do something more than just isolate or try to protect this area for them, that we should advise the scientific world that there are these people who seem to be very different.
Elizalde had learned of the tribe through a hunter named Defal, who had discovered the Tasaday while out setting his traps one day in the 1960s. Defal brought the Tasaday knives, earrings, cloth, introduced them to new sources of food, and to trapping. There was even a joke that Tasaday history could be divided into two periods, before and after Defal. The Philippine government stopped the logging, and the scientific world savored the opportunity to study a living picture of our own human past. For most of our history, all of the human race lived as the Tasaday seemed to. As Paleolithic nomads, we collected food from the wild by hunting and gathering. We lived in caves or shelters, used stone tools, and wore plant or animal skin clothing. A crucial change began about 10,000 years ago in the Middle East, where we first learned to produce food instead of collecting it from the wild, by growing crops and domesticating animals. Iron tools came much later, beginning around 3000 BC. Could the Tasaday have been alone in their caves for 10,000 years? It was a tantalizing idea. These are the Kung people of southern Africa, as they were in the 1960s. The Kung, like the Tasaday, and like a handful of other groups around the world, are hunter-gatherers. Because their lifestyle is so ancient, some scientists believe that hunter-gatherers may have a society and nature closer to that of our ancestors, and might give us insights into our past. Were we, for instance, peaceful or aggressive? But all the hunter-gatherer groups we know of have long been in contact, however indirectly, with agriculturalists and the modern world. That's what made the Tasaday so fascinating. In their perfect isolation, they seem to present man in his pristine state. And they couldn't have come along at a better time, as anthropologist Alan Barnard explains.
In the 1960s, I think the notion of the primitive hunter-gatherer was more important than it is to us today. Perhaps it stems from the hippie movement, the flower power idea, and so on. I think somehow anthropology had its own notion of flower power, which was, for us, a kind of interest in primal mankind. People thought the Tasaday were the primal people, were somehow more original, more true, purer in spirit, perhaps because they were out of contact, it was said, with other groups.
The Tasaday became instant celebrities. National Geographic magazine devoted 32 pages to the Stone Age men of Mindanao, reporting that stripped of civilization, the tribe lived as equals, and that it seemed that one Tasaday man needed to work only 2 hours a day to supply enough food for his family. For their peaceful and affectionate nature, the tribe became known as the Gentle Tasaday. 1 month later, NBC News correspondent Jack Reynolds introduced the tribe to a national television audience.
There are a few words in the Tasaday language that you should know because you'll be hearing them during the course of the program. The first word is chi, which means wow, oh boy, holy smokes. Chi. Oh. The second word is oho, which is affirmative. It means that's right, that's correct, yes sir. And the other word is kakai, which means friend.
Oh,
Kakai lobo, kakai lolo. Oh. The other word is mafian, which means beautiful, good, all things nice. Mafian.
Oh, mafian.
Kakai lolo, mafian.
oh, mafian.
Oh, she.
The image of the Tasaday was firmly fixed. But what were the scientists finding as they worked side by side with the press? In August of 1972, the Tasaday were visited by Douglas Yen, a world-renowned ethnobotanist. Yen spent a month with the Tasaday, studying their diet and their knowledge of forest plants.
It was one of the best periods of field work that I ever had. I enjoyed it immensely. I liked the people. I liked all of them.
Professor Yen's work is to describe the unique ways that different cultures use and cultivate the plants around them. When all plant uses, medicine, food, and products from rope to soap are taken into account, a distinct portrait of a culture emerges.
The hard. Do they use it for anything?
Here, Yen demonstrates his method.
This is for medicine.
Because people take their plants with them when they migrate, the skilled ethnobotanist can connect even far-flung communities through a study of plant use and diet. Yen's analysis of the Tasaday diet showed low levels of both protein and carbohydrates. Before Defal taught improved hunting skills, it was a distinct possibility that food gathering was not the easy game depicted in the news reports. Life in the Garden of Eden may have been tough. Next, Yen looked for signs of isolation. As little as a 3-hour walk through the rainforest would have brought the Tasaday to the village of Blit and their farming neighbors, the Manobo. More remote to the east were the farms and fields of the Taboli people. Yet the Tasaday claimed never to have met either one of them. But maybe their ancestors had. From the specimens and data he collected in the field, Yen tried to draw historical links between the Tasaday and their farming neighbors. The comparison was surprising. As had been claimed, the Tasaday recognized no cultivated plants. They had no agriculture. As for wild plants, the expectation was that a tribe alone in the forest for thousands of years would know and use more plants than anyone. But the Tasaday knew less. Yen's first guess was that the Tasaday might be a group of secondary primitives, people who were once part of the main farming community who had split off. In December 1972, Yen was joined at the caves by Carol Maloney, one of 3 linguists to study the Tasaday. The linguists were trying to pin down the length of Tasaday isolation through an analysis of their speech.
One way in which language helps us to learn about the history of the Tasaday is because language is so conservative. It retains the sounds and forms long after the culture or the material objects have disappeared. In English, for instance, we have the term chariot long after the associated material object has disappeared. With the Tasaday as well, we can learn about their past through study of their language.
When he first met the Tasaday, Elizalde reported that communication was the biggest problem. Even his translators had trouble understanding them. But to the linguists, and later to neighboring tribesmen, it was clear that Tasaday was a language in the Manobo family. In fact, as much as 80% of the Tasaday vocabulary was identical with one Manobo language. That meant contact, as Doug Yen's work had suggested. The Tasaday must have split off at some point from the Manobo farming community. The idea that the Tasaday had been lost in their caves for thousands of years now disappeared. Could their language suggest just how long ago they did become isolated? Some Tasaday words were unique, and there was a lack of terms for many of the everyday objects of Manobo life. The Tasaday accent, the tune of their speech, as the Manobo put it, was unusual. Maloney compared each Tasaday word with its Manobo equivalent, examining the pronunciation changes. These sound shifts can reveal a great deal about history.
English has 2 words, chief and chef, which have been borrowed from the same French word. We know that the first one, chief, was borrowed before the 16th century, and the second one, chef, after the 16th century, because we know that French underwent a sound shift in the meantime, from the ch sound to the sh sound in that environment. Now, using that kind of knowledge, historical linguistics can show us when Tasaday split off from their Manobo neighbors and formed a language of their own.
This initial linguistic analysis moved the Tasaday out of the Stone Age and into the Middle Ages. No more than 800 years ago, around the time Marco Polo set sail for the east, the Tasaday split off from the farming Manobos. Since that time, they had so little contact, they developed their own culture and way of speaking. The Tasaday weren't originally cavemen at all, it seemed, but they had become them. Further details might come from the anthropologists. But the late Robert Fox, the anthropologist who organized the research, was only able to meet the Tasaday 3 times, and never at the caves. And Elizalde, protective of the tribe, put science second. He placed limits on access to the Tasaday, and even tried to forbid certain questions that he thought touched on sensitive issues. Some scientists felt they were in danger. In June 1972, 2 anthropologists, who some say were troubled by what they were finding, were evacuated following gunshots into the camp by an unseen attacker who did not return. Meanwhile, there always seemed to be time for the press and their helicopters. The story of the Stone Age cavemen seemed too good to give up. There were quarrels with Elizalde, complaints that publicity seemed to be his main concern. Film star turned photojournalist Gino Lollobrigida got in to see the Tasaday, but no full-scale, long-term anthropological study could be arranged. The Tasaday area had been declared a national preserve. Then, in 1974, the stream of visitors was stopped, and the press and the scientists were ordered out. There would be no further study of the gentle Tasaday. 12 years later, in 1986, the Marcos regime collapsed. In the chaos that followed, a Swiss journalist, following a tip, slipped down to see the Tasaday.
They lived in houses, they didn't live in caves. And they told me that they were in fact not a separate tribe called Tasaday, but that they were from the local tribes Manubo and Tiboli. They told me that it was the idea of Elizalde to make them pose as cavemen and Stone Age people in order to become famous. This is Gintry with his 2 wives and children. And his cloth, that's how I met him the first minute. An interesting thing happened 1 week later. A German magazine called Stern, they sent their own reporters there. They didn't know that I was there, I didn't know about them either. And the funny thing happened that the same man, Gintry, was presented to them as Stone Age cavemen. This time wear leaves, and you can see it's made quite silly. Some underwear underneath the leaves, you can see it through here. The Tasaday was a hoax orchestrated by Elizalde.
The news was a sensation.
On the ABC, 2020.
Tonight, Stone Age cavemen discovered in a Philippine forest in the early 70s. They shocked the world and changed history books. They were primitive, peaceful, and phony.
If this was a hoax, that's a heck of a story.
The truth that could change history back. The truth behind the tribe that never was.
ABC's producer for the Tasaday story was Judith Moses.
We asked them how they knew when to go to the caves, and they said they were always warned. Somebody from Manda Elizalde's group or from somebody who worked for Panamin in the area would come around and warn them. The Tasaday told us that in exchange for posing naked and playing the Stone Age caveman routine, that they would be rewarded. We asked them with what? What were you promised? They said that they were promised food, which is very important to them. They said they were promised clothing, and much to our astonishment, they were promised their own helicopter.
In the Philippines, rumors that had circulated for years were now openly discussed. The Tasaday hoax, it was charged, was part of a Marcos and Elizalde plot to strip tribal people of their lands. Elizalde had left the Philippines in 1983, followed by rumors he took $35 million in Panamin funds with him, and as many as 25 young tribal women.
Absolute lies. All of these accusations are absolute lies, based on gossip, on rumors, and have no basis in fact.
Manda Elizalde returned to the Philippines in 1987. He has built a replica of the Tasaday rainforest on his estate.
All these accusations are foundless. They are based on gossip, rumors, and deliberate lies. Now, Why they did this is a rather complicated story, and I am ready to confront any of them and tell them why they're doing it. The loggers, cause-oriented groups who may have a political motivation, scientists who perhaps, like in a minor case like the Tasaday, were scared to go into the mountains where we lived, because I lived in the mountains with the tribes, and now try to make analysis and conjecture sitting in a plush office in Manila when we were sitting in leech-infested areas fighting together with the tribes against all comers.
Elizalde, whose family is one of the richest in the Philippines, scoffs at the idea that he's exploited the tribe.
For 17 years, I have been accused of having cordoned off the Tasaday reservation in order to take advantage of it, for business reasons or whatever. 17 years have passed, and I have still gotten nothing from this land whatsoever.
Elizalde continues to champion the Tasaday. In 1988, he brought the tribe to Manila in hopes of proving their authenticity in court. The Tasaday seemed delighted to see their old friend again and to enjoy his hospitality and some of the pleasures of the modern world. Certainly, the tribe had been exposed to much that was new since 1972, and they had changed. But were they a hoax? There were 14 scientists who had seen the group in the early 70s, and none of them had ever said the Tasaday were a fraud. In the light of new evidence, would they change their minds?
No, I don't believe the Tasaday are a hoax. I have my opinions about the exploitation of their existence, but not that they're a hoax. There's nothing that anyone said that would make me believe that it's a hoax.
I was quite skeptical about the Tasaday before I went there. That they might be Stone Age holdovers. Oh, come on. I thought that there were only 27 of them and that they lived in a forest only a 3-hour walk from farms and fields. And furthermore, the association with Elizalde, that Elizalde was, promoting the story or releasing the story, made me quite suspicious. But after having gone there and having learned about their language and the corroboration with other kinds of evidence about them, made it clear to me that these are authentic, real, primitive people.
But others in the field are not so sure. In 1988, at the World Congress of Anthropology, the original Tasaday researchers were criticized as romantics, in love with the idea of the noble savage.
The Tasaday were produced. Elizalde predefined it for the scientists that came in, as well as for people that are less sophisticated, so that observers, both scholarly and journalistic, went in with an idée fixe as to what it was they're going to see, and they tended to see it. Imagine people living within a 3-hour walk of agricultural villages that have been there for a long time and being totally unaware of them. Look at the pictures of the tools. You're anthropologists. Those are not stone tools like any people have ever made. And I think these are the only tip of the iceberg of the implausibilities. But I want to...
Gerald Berriman, an expert on ethics and anthropology, has launched an exhaustive attack on the early Tasaday accounts, both scientific and journalistic.
The initial reports of the Tasaday are, to me, as an anthropologist, implausible, and beyond that, they're preposterous in their implausibility. It was said that these people not only lived in caves, but they had left no remains whatsoever in those caves of the food they ate or the tools they had. Archaeologists know that this is an impossibility. As to the nature of their culture, it was said that they had no hunting technology of any kind, no fishing technology of any kind. They had to catch the fish by hand. The largest thing they had ever eaten that was a living, moving being was a frog. And no carrying or storing technology such as baskets or bags. People that are supposedly gathering wild food products have no way to carry it except in their hands. They had no rituals of any kind, nor any ritual specialists, or any religious specialists. no folklore. These are not only improbabilities, but impossibilities. There's no group of people in the last 40,000 years that's been without those kinds of cultural features. When you put these claims all together, they don't add up to an anthropologically believable account of a way of life of a so-called primitive people. It sounds more like what a junior high school class assigned to invent a primitive religion, a primitive way of life, might have put together. No insult to junior high school students, but it is not anthropologically believable. It's not authentic.